It began not with a roar, but with a whisper. The stars did not die all at once. They bled out slowly, as though even the light had grown weary of shining upon the empire of the Eldar. On the galactic rim, where the halo of the known faded into the formless dark, suns guttered and winked away, not from war, nor from cosmic disaster, but from neglect. The ancients who once nurtured those systems with the reverence of gods had long since turned inward, consumed not by enemies, but by their own brilliance. At the height of their dominion, the Eldar were gods in all but name. They had conquered not by flame or fang, but by thought, art, and the song of stars. Their minds sculpted realities, their dreams carved cities of living crystal and breathless symmetry. Every world they touched became a monument to perfection, and in time, even the warp, unpredictable and wild, bent to their will. And yet, as the light of their empire reached every corner of the galaxy, something colder stirred within its heart. He stood alone beneath the singing spire of Assyrian, where the songlines of the craft world Elurith once chimed in harmony with the motions of the cosmos. Now they rang hollow, discordant, like the strained final notes of a harp left to rot in silence. High Farser Kelethan Morwe, last of the line of echoes, watched the stars through the translucent dome of the Tower of Remembrance. His robes, once bearing the vibrant pulse of psychic embroidery, now shimmered in fading hues, a symbol of mourning, though no one around him had died yet, not in the conventional sense. "Have you come to stand vigil again, my lord?" The voice was soft, familiar. Virilai, his oldest pupil, and perhaps the last who still sought counsel rather than pleasure. Kelethan did not turn. His eyes remained fixed on the void. "It is not a vigil, Virilai. It is penance." She said nothing at first. He could hear her footsteps echo faintly as she approached, soft, deliberate, respectful. "You speak of guilt as though you alone carry the burden of decline. But even the wisest of our kin cannot reverse time." "No," he murmured, "but we can see its shape, and still fail to act." He lowered himself to one knee before the mosaic at the tower's center, an inlaid depiction of Isha, mother of tears, reaching into the heavens for her wayward children. Once a work of radiant power, the psychic weave in the tiles now pulsed only dimly. He traced her hand with a trembling finger, as though feeling the warmth of the past through memory alone. "It was not always like this," he whispered. "We once built worlds for no purpose but beauty. We debated the laws of existence with the old ones. We tamed the immaterium and danced among galaxies as easily as you and I walk this path. But now," he rose slowly, voice hardening, "now we indulge. We twist our intellect to create agonies mistaken for art. We break the veil not to understand it, but to amuse ourselves with what comes through the cults." Virilai said bitterly, "Yes, excess has become our god, though none dare name it yet." Silence fell between them like a blade. Somewhere far below, the city of Ellerith pulsed with light and sound, not the harmonious echoes of thought and serenity, but the thrum of bass tones, laughter soaked in madness, and psychic pulses that reeked of unshackled indulgence. "They would call you old," Virilai said softly, "afraid of evolution." Kelethan gave a dry laugh. "Perhaps I am old, but not afraid. I have seen what evolution brings when untethered to wisdom." There was a pause, an uncomfortable stretch of stillness that spoke of something deeper than disagreement. Virilai had not come merely to converse. He sensed it now in the curvature of her aura, the way her thoughts trembled against the skein of the warp like a blade half withdrawn. "You have news," he said, not a question but a sentence weighed with inevitability. Virelai nodded. "The seers of Velerith have broken with the conclave. They say your words are poison, fear-mongering. They name you traitor to progress." Kelethan closed his eyes. There it was, the first true fracture. Not just disagreement, but denouncement. The dream of unity, even among the seers and vision keepers, was shattering. "And what do you say?" he asked quietly. "I say." Virelai hesitated. He turned to face her at last. She was younger, though in Eldar terms, still 1,000 years old. Her eyes shimmered with ancient sorrow and new fire. "I say I remember when your visions warned of war, and we laughed. And then the Monkey came, and then the Hrud resurgence. You were right, always. But no one listened until it was too late." Her eyes met his. "And they won't listen now," Kelethan sighed. "Then we are already dead. We simply haven't realized it yet." Beyond the crystal walls, the warp pulsed. It had grown louder in recent years. No longer a river of possibility, but a boiling sea of hunger. Whispers brushed the edges of perception. Beautiful, terrible things. Not of demon or god, not yet, but of something coming. Something being fed. The Eldar had long mastered the warp, but now it watched them. It waited. And Kelethan knew why. He remembered the first time he had peered into the deeper skeins, into the folds that lay beneath even the dreams of gods. What stared back was not a beast, nor a flame, but a mirror. A vast, terrible mirror, reflecting the unending want that festered beneath the surface of Eldar perfection. Pride, lust, vanity, the psychic overflow of a race that had forgotten restraint. In time, he gave it a name. She who thirsts. Not yet born, but not unborn either. A god of their own making. A thing woven from the unchecked desires of a people who had become so powerful that even their thoughts shaped reality, and so decadent that they no longer cared what their dreams wrought. He had tried to warn them. He had pleaded before the conclave, laid bare the visions of a galaxy drowned in screams. He was called a relic, a fossil, a fearmonger clinging to old truths, while the new age danced naked into infinity. And so he withdrew, to Elurith, to silence, to memory. But even silence cannot hold forever. "Do you remember what you taught me?" Virelai's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "The first lesson?" He turned. "Speak it." She stood straighter. "That we are stewards of time. That knowledge is responsibility, and vision a curse unless born with purpose." He nodded slowly. "Good. Then you know what must be done." She hesitated. "The others will not follow you. The revels are too loud, the joy too great. You will be cast out, let them cast. I would rather be exiled for truth than crowned for silence." The stars above flared. One winked out. Somewhere far away, a child of the cult of ecstasy was born. Her mind already open to the warp, already laughing at the dreams of mortals. And somewhere even further still, a ripple passed through the immaterium, like the first cry of a thing still in the womb. A promise of hunger eternal. Virelai stepped forward. "Then I will go with you. Where you walk, so do I." Kelethan smiled, a rare thing, like a broken statue remembering it once had form. "Then we begin again," he whispered. The sky thundered with silence. The stars continued dying. But somewhere in that fading light, a path opened. It led into darkness. The corridors of the prism spires still shimmered with beauty beyond mortal reckoning. Walls of transparent thought crystal refracted starlight into ribbons of colour. casting the illusion of serenity across the chambers of Velereth's seer conclave. But beneath the gilded stillness, tension twisted like a blade beneath silk. Lyratir Vanis, High Mistress of the Radiant Eye and speaker for the seers of Velereth, stood motionless as her acolytes arranged the prism globes of perception around her. Their pale hands moved with elegance and reverence, yet her mind was elsewhere, caught in a snare of doubt and decision. She remembered Kelethan's words. He had once stood beside her in this very chamber, robes still damp with the blood of prophecy, eyes fever-bright as he described the future that only he could see. "We are feeding it," he had said, "each indulgence, each dream twisted into excess. We are building a god of thirst." She had dismissed him, not out of ignorance, but fear. Now the signs were harder to ignore. "What do you see, mistress?" a voice asked gently. It was Eularen, her younger speaker, kneeling reverently at her side. Lyrathir's eyes flickered open. The globes spun slowly before her, 10 polished spheres of thought matter, each tied to a thread of fate drawn from the warp. One was flickering, another was dark, a third pulsed with a low thrum like a heartbeat out of rhythm. "I see a choice," she whispered, "and the illusion of one." Eularen frowned. "Do you mean?" "Yes." She turned toward him, and her voice softened. "The future splinters. We either walk into flame and call it ascension, or follow Kelethan into exile and call it madness." The younger seer's face darkened. He betrayed the conclave. "No," Lyrathir said, shaking her head slowly. "He defied it. That is different. One comes from malice, the other from grief." Beyond the tower of Velereth, the city was ablaze with light, not from fire, but celebration. The festival of the abyss was beginning, a tri-moon revel celebrated by the cults of sensation. Entire districts were given over to pleasure, psychic inversion, and acts that strained the veil of the warp. Crystalline towers shifted their shape to the rhythm of sonic pulses. Eldar minds, no longer bound by restraint, sought euphoria in pain, madness, or the breaking of their own form. To the revelers, it was joy. To the ancient minds who remembered the time of becoming, it was something else entirely. Rot. Lyratir watched from the balcony as a procession of dancers passed below. Clad in illusion and firelight, their flesh flickering between states, adorned in whispers and impossible sound. They moved like gods, because that is what they believed themselves to be. "You hesitate," Eularen said, "but the others do not." "I hesitate because I remember," she answered, "when we walked the galaxy to heal, not to consume. When our seers sought balance, not bliss." He said nothing, and in the silence, Lyrathir could hear the sound beneath the celebration. A psychic hum, subtle, invasive, ever-present. It was not music, it was hunger, not hers, not Eularen's. Something deeper, a presence coiled around the thoughts of a billion minds, invisible yet omnipresent. They were no longer only experiencing pleasure, they were being watched. Viralai moved through the corridors of Allurith with urgency in her stride. Her thoughts were sharpened, a storm beneath practiced calm. Since pledging herself to Kelethan's side, she had felt her connection to the warp clarifying, becoming more focused, as if a fog had lifted. But that clarity had come with new pain. Whispers followed her now. She could feel the minds of her kin vibrating with stimuli they no longer controlled. In the academies, students created illusions that bled into reality. In the theatres, pain and ecstasy were indistinguishable. The craft world's ancient soulstone matrix, once a sanctuary for the dead, was dimming. as if the spirits no longer wished to remain, or could no longer find peace. She passed under a vaulted arch inscribed with one of the old teachings of Vaul. To craft is to bind the soul. To unmake without purpose is to invite the void. How often had they read those words without understanding them? Kelethan stood at the centre of the spire of echoes, surrounded by ancient tomes and dataglyphs. He moved his hands in precise ritual motions, pulling skeins of the warp into a pattern meant for communication, not with another mind, but with time itself. The future was shifting faster now. Possibilities once distant had begun collapsing inward. Threads of fate that stretched centuries now ended in fire, or darkness, or worse, stillness. He breathed slowly, and for a moment, the threads revealed a vision. A world of screaming glass, cities weeping blood, and above it all a throne of shadow upon which sat nothing, but still it hungered. He staggered back. "Did you see it?" Virlai asked. She had entered silently, but he had felt her presence, as always. "I saw the wound," he said, "and the blade that made it. Is it her, the one you speak of?" Kelethan hesitated. "Not yet, but close. The warp coils tighter. The thirst grows bolder. She is not born, but she is being." Virlai approached, her tone darker. "Then we must act. We must leave. Elurith is already sick. The others will not follow." He looked at her and saw the truth in her eyes. There would be no victory here. Only delay. Survival, perhaps, but not salvation. "Then we leave," he said. Across the galaxy, in the core world of Sylvandal, Archon Cybraith of the cult of boundless euphoria laughed as he descended into the crucible of form. Around him, 1,000 dancers tore their bodies into spirals of pain and light, channeling their psychic outpour into the realm beyond sight. Each scream was a gift, each pleasure a prayer, and something listened, something vast, something beautiful. He reached out with his mind and felt it respond, not as a god, not yet, but as a tide rising beyond the break, a soul that had no name, only appetite, a mirror that hungered to be filled. "Soon," he whispered to the formless air, "soon we will crown you." Back in Velarith, Lyrithia knelt before the prism globes again. Her hands trembled. For centuries, her readings had been clear. Precise strands of possibility laid bare before her gaze. Now they were fog. Every future ended the same way. Not in war, not in peace, but in consumption. Not by an army, but by desire. She opened her eyes and wept. Not for herself, but for the future she had helped blindfold. "Ulerin," she said softly, "send word. I will speak with Kelethan." He looked at her, uncertain. "But you, do not mistake delay for denial." He was right, she rose, "and we are out of time." Thus the cracks widened. Elurith prepared to cast out its most ancient seer. Velarith questioned its loyalty. Sylvandal drowned itself in pleasure so deep it could no longer recognize pain. The stars above still shone, but their light no longer warmed. And deep within the warp, a thing stirred. It had no name. It had no form, but it was being named, being shaped by every whisper, every scream, every moment of unchained ecstasy. A god made not of will, but of want, and it was almost ready. The starlight that touched the outer hull of Ilith Al, the craft world in exile, was dim and cold. It reflected not like silver, but like ash. Born from desperation and torn from the heart of the Eldari Empire, it drifted through the void like a splinter of regret, silent, bitter, beautiful. From its observation deck, Kelethan watched the remnants of the nebula Harith Vin as it collapsed in upon itself. a once vibrant star nursery now reduced to scattered fragments and errant energies. He had once spoken before the high conclave of Ultanar about this region, preaching restraint when they proposed redirecting the flows of the warp to accelerate its starbirth. They had called him hesitant. Now there was no longer anything left to birth. Even among the stars, they had found ways to overreach. Footsteps. He did not turn. He knew who it was. "I miss the silence of Illurith," said Viralai softly. Her voice carried with it a nostalgia older than memory. Not its people, nor its temples. Just the silence. The way it allowed the soul to breathe, Kelethan nodded. Even the air here mourns differently. She came to stand beside him. Through the thick lens glass of the deck, the stars stared back with impassive distance, neither welcoming nor cruel, just indifferent. "How many joined us?" he asked. 9,000 souls. Mostly artisans, old seers, and a few warriors too stubborn or shamed to remain. Out of trillions, they called you a coward. A dream weaver corrupted by mortal fear. I would have accepted coward if it saved them. His voice was almost a whisper, not from shame, but the exhaustion that came from prophesying doom, only to be mocked by those who danced toward it. His mind, once open and luminous, now trembled beneath the pressure of all he had seen and all he could no longer prevent. The Illithale had no crystal towers, no temples of infinite echo. It was a husk repurposed, a reclamation vessel turned craftworld, outfitted hastily for survival. Where once there had been polished artifice and psycholuminescent gardens, now there were corridors of reinforced wraithbone, bare and hollow. The spirit matrix hummed with unease. The souls of the departed did not sing here. They watched. The transition had not been kind. Many of the young had refused the path disciplines, indulging in dreams they smuggled from the Empire through memory or artificial stimulant. A new silence had settled on the craft world, not peaceful, but mournful. The kind of silence left behind by those who had nothing to say. One among them was Ethan Deer. He had once been a guardian of the Sapphire Fold, sworn to protect the world spires of Sylvandal. He had known the weight of a singing spear in his palm, the thunder of battle psalms in his blood. Now he drifted between duties, his soul unmoored. He had followed Kelethan not out of faith, but because he could no longer pretend to serve what Sylvandal had become. "Guardians of pleasure," he muttered once, when no one could hear. "Priests of pain." Now, aboard Illithale, he patrolled empty halls and watched children practice paths they did not believe in. He saw their hesitation, their confusion, their yearning glances toward the fading projections of ancient Eldar cities, shimmering softly in the memory alcoves. They missed the rot, even when they knew it would kill them. Kelethan stood in the soul chamber, alone. Around him hovered the crystalline sarcophagi of ancient seers, each enshrined in spirit stone, each once a titan of foresight. He knelt before one, Seren Valra, the dream witch of Ithar, lost during the first decade of exile. She had seen the coming of the cradle cries, the rise of the sensation cults, and the wane of restraint. "You burned your eyes so you would never look upon the revelries again," he murmured. He reached forward, hand hovering just above the crystal. "I understand now." The spirit stones gave no reply, yet he felt it, a silence not of death, but of waiting. These were not echoes. These were still minds, listening, perhaps judging, perhaps afraid. In the bowels of the vessel, the dissidents whispered. There were those among the exiled who believed that Kelethan had gone too far, not in leaving, but in denying. Pleasure, they said, was not the enemy. The cults were not corrupt. They were simply uncontrolled. If joy could be regulated, if the ritual and ecstasy could be disciplined, then perhaps the Eldari could evolve without collapsing. One of them, Silen Mar, had once walked the path of the sculptor. His hands had shaped flesh and light together, creating forms that wept in gratitude for their existence. Now he led secret gatherings in the night cycle, seeking to restore what he called the beautiful balance. He believed that Kelethan's asceticism was just another kind of pride, a rejection of their true nature. He fears the self, Silen said to his followers, because he has lost his own. Their numbers were small, but they were growing. Lirithir's message came in the night, encoded in a strand of light that danced across the dreamline beacons of the craft world's outer ring. Virelai read it in silence, alone in her quarters. Come to Velareth, the conclave fractures. The others begin to listen. She stared at the words long after they faded. Too late, she whispered. Yet when she brought the message to Kelethan, he said nothing for a long time. Then finally, we will return. You said, I know what I said, but what I see now is worse than what I feared. If the rot is to be cut away, it must be done from within, Virelai frowned. You think they will welcome you? No, his voice was calm. But they will need me. And somewhere, in the far reaches of the warp, a ripple of laughter echoed, not with mirth, but anticipation, like the breath before a scream, like silk tightening around the throat of a god, yet to be born. Back aboard Ilith Ale, Ethan Dare stood at the edge of the training dome, watching the youth stumble through forms of the path of the warrior. Their movements were elegant but hesitant, incomplete. He remembered battle, real battle. He remembered watching lovers devour each other on Sulvandal's dying balconies as the sky split with lightning not born of any storm. He remembered shielding a child's mind with his own when the pleasure rains descended. Shadows that whispered promises of transformation through surrender. He remembered running. Now, these children looked to him for strength, but his hands no longer shook with conviction. They simply shook. He turned his eyes upward and wondered how long this sanctuary could last, how long before even the exiled forgot what they had run from. In Velareth, Lirithir stood in the conclave hall once more. Around her, other seers debated with sharpened tones and veiled disdain. The cults had begun influencing even the path speakers. The division was no longer about excess. It was about identity, what it meant to be Eldar. Some argued that the warp itself was a tool, one to be mastered, not feared. Others, quieter, feared the very name Kelethan had once whispered in secret. Slanith, one dared say aloud, the she who thirsts. The god unborn. The words silenced the chamber. Lirithir said nothing. She only raised her eyes to the stars. They did not blink. And that terrified her most of all. The void between stars was not empty. It was listening. At the outer rim of the sorrow wreath, the name given to the spectral mist curling like frost around Ilith Ale's warp shadow, there began to rise a sound, not audible to mortal ears, not detectable by auger or lens. It came as a tension in the soul, like a question unasked, but already answered. The seers felt it first, not all, only those sensitive enough to know what they could never admit. Kelethan sat in meditation, his limbs folded beneath him, the room encased in null light. Yet even here, where silence should have protected the mind, a whisper pressed against the folds of his thoughts. Not a voice, a hunger. He opened his eyes. sweat blooming on his brow like dew. Something had turned to face him from the immaterium, and it recognized him. The craft world moved now toward Velerith, toward the fractured heart of what was once the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. The return was not public. Kelethan had no desire for spectacle. They would not march in triumph, nor supplicate at the gates. They would observe, for now. But even as they crossed back into known systems, dissent sharpened within. In the undervoid, where the spirit stones hummed in, their resting matrix, Silent Mar knelt before an altar of his own design, fashioned not from crystal or wraithbone, but from obsidian mirrors and braided silk. It reflected not the body, but the soul. And when Silence stared long enough, the mirror began to weep. You see, he told the acolytes kneeling in a circle around him, even the spirit yields to beauty. One of them, a young psyker barely past her first path, raised her trembling hand. But Master Mar, they say there is something stirring in the warp. Something vast. Wrong. Yes. Silence smiled gently. The tide is rising, and in its depths we will drown our weakness. He gestured, and the lights dimmed. One by one, the mirrors shivered with something not of this world. Ethan Deer had begun to dream again. He hadn't dreamed in years. His discipline, though weakened, had kept the mind closed. Yet now, each night, a presence slipped between the cracks of his memory, unfolding visions not of war, but of longing. In one, he stood before a tower of silvered bone that pulsed like a heart. It whispered his name, not as he was, but as he had been. Guardian, killer, witness. He walked toward it, and the tower opened. He would wake gasping, fingers clenched around a phantom spear. Why now? He asked himself aloud. Why this? He brought his unease to Kelethan, expecting scorn or dismissal, but the seer's expression darkened. They're not dreams, Kelethan said. They are invitations. Ethan felt his blood chill. From who? Kelethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Not who. What? Virelai watched the warp through the crystal helm of the navigation spire. Normally, she felt no kinship with the flow of unreality. It was Kelethan's domain, not hers. She moved by instinct and starlight, not prophecy. But even now she felt it. The warp, like a sea once calm and cruel, now surged with eagerness. Something hunts us, she said to herself, and it knows we're coming home. She turned from the viewport, but not before catching a glimpse of her reflection in the glass. For just a moment, her eyes were not her own. Velerith shone like a jewel, cold, alien, exquisite. The spires of the high conclave pierced the upper atmosphere like frozen lightning, but the light was thinner now, as though some hidden star had dimmed in anticipation. When Illith Isle approached, there were no formal greetings, no fanfare, only silence. They were not hated, nor welcomed. They were acknowledged. Kelethan disembarked in shadow, accompanied only by Virelai and 2 guardians. He wore the robes of the outcast seer path, his staff unadorned. No sigils of pride, no trappings of the Empire. The conclave met him in the Hall of Remembrance, a vast chamber filled with soulstones, each embedded in the walls like stars. It was said that every soul ever lost by the conclave left its echo here, a place of reverence. But tonight, it felt like a tomb. Lyrithir greeted him with a nod. Her eyes were darker now, more withdrawn. You've come at last, she said. No, Kelethan replied. I've returned. That's not the same. A pause. They're listening to the cults now, she admitted. Even the seers, especially the young ones. And what of the old? We speak, but our voices drown in laughter. Endless, shapeless laughter. Kelethan's eyes narrowed. The laughter is her veil. Lirithir nodded once. I know. Behind them, Virelai placed her hand on the wall of soul stones. She closed her eyes. I don't hear them anymore, she said. Lirithir turned sharply. What? The spirits. They're still present, but they do not speak. Silence fell, heavier than before. Kelethan raised his head slowly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. They're hiding, he whispered. In the quiet dormitories of Ilith Ael, Silent Ma stood before a mirror. He no longer smiled. He screamed, not aloud, not with lips or lungs, but within his mind something howled, a song of pleasure so exquisite it twisted into pain, then back again, until neither could be named. He had seen it, a figure in the warp, androgynous, infinite, terrible, eyes of burning ecstasy, flesh that melted and reshaped with each heartbeat, and it had touched him. The mark was not physical, but it burned, like adoration, like a lover's whisper wrapped in poison. He fell to his knees and wept. Mother of shapes, he breathed, take me. That night, aboard Ilithael, the dream sickness spread. Children woke screaming, unable to remember why. Spirit seers felt cold in their bones where no cold should live. And the craft world itself, its guiding wraithbone matrix, began to flicker with pulses of uncommanded light. Virelai entered the meditation chambers and found dozens gathered, kneeling, weeping, chanting to themselves words in no Eldar dialect she recognized. At the center, a young girl levitated, eyes wide open. She's speaking to me, the girl whispered. The song. It wants us to dance. Virelai stepped forward, heart pounding. Kelethan was already there, fingers stretched in psychic containment, his own eyes bloodshot from the strain. I told them, he rasped. I told them this would come. The girl's body began to split at the mouth, not with blood, but with light. A second tongue, forked, fluid, shimmering like glass, emerged, and from her throat came a word that froze the chamber. Slanesh. Then she fell, and all lights went dark. Hours later, Kelethan stood before a mirror of his own. He no longer asked whether he had been right. Now he asked something far more dangerous. Is it already too late? The mirror offered no answer. But from somewhere, very faintly, a laugh began. The soul stones began to dim. Not all at once. No calamity so bold. No, this was more insidious. A gentle fading. A breath held too long. A silence settling like dust on the heart of the craft world. The seers called it the Veil Quiet, though none dared speak it aloud near the young. They would still smile, still dance. But their joy was hollow, like a song sung in a forgotten tongue. Even in Ilithael's grand halls, once awash with living colour, kinetic art, and crystalline harmonics, there came a stillness. Beauty had not died, but something in the gaze that beheld it had changed. It no longer inspired wonder. It incited hunger. In the chambers beneath the Farseer Sanctum, Virelai stood alone before the hologlyphs of the webway. The lines of ancient light wove a map of impossible dimensions, roots that twisted around the laws of space and time. Once, the webway had been their salvation, the great triumph of order over the chaos of the warp. Now every path was trembling. She placed her hand on the projection. The strands quivered as if in fear. What's chasing us? She whispered. What did we leave behind? Or what have we brought with us? No answer came. Only a pulse. Something had awakened in the deep corridors of the webway, a flutter in the dimensional silence. It was moving toward them. No, through them. Silent Mar no longer taught. His disciples found him kneeling in rooms of incense and shadow, surrounded by sigils scorched into the air with psychic heat. He did not speak. He only bled. From the eyes, the fingertips, the tongue. They worshipped him anyway. One acolyte, emboldened by youth and madness, brought him a gift, a coiled strand of hair taken from a dreaming oracle who had not yet awoken. She sang in her sleep, the acolyte said. I thought you'd want to hear her. Silent touched the hair as though it were sacred. Then he laughed, softly at first, then uncontrollably, until it echoed down the obsidian halls. You still think this is worship? He asked. No, this is birth. He looked up, eyes black with warp light. She's already inside us. In the heart of Velareth, the conclave began to fracture. Some seers argued for retreat, deeper into the stars, to abandoned craftworlds and ancient strongholds untouched since the old wars. Others demanded unity, urging all paths to align and bend toward a single purpose. But the problem was simple. No one knew what the purpose was anymore. The empire no longer expanded. The path no longer guided. Even the infinity circuits, a once flawless network of preserved souls, now spoke only in broken echoes. Kelethan watched the debate in cold silence. He saw what the others would not say aloud. They were no longer speaking for the future. They were speaking to delay the end. After the council, Lirithir approached him beneath the statue of Morai Heg, the blind goddess of fate and endings. You're right, she said, about the girl. About the name she spoke, Kelethan didn't move. We've found others, she added, across 3 craft worlds, unconnected, unaware of each other, all dreaming the same dreams. Then it's not a coincidence, he said. No, it's a summoning. A cold breeze moved through the open chamber. Though no air should have stirred, they both shivered. Lirithir whispered, What do we do? Kelethan turned to the statue. He had no answer. Ethon Deer walked the meditation paths alone. His spear, ritual, not martial, dragged behind him, tip scraping sparks from the wraithbone floor. He hadn't spoken in 3 days, not since the dreams had returned with her voice in them. Slanesh. He didn't know the name until the girl had spoken it. But now he could feel it echoing inside him. It wasn't a voice like Kelethan's calm whispers or Silen's velvet sermons. It was pleasure wrapped in teeth. A call that made him feel ashamed, but not for the reasons he had feared. He didn't fear death. He feared how much he wanted what he saw in the dreams. And in one dream, so vivid it might have been real, he had looked upon a world of mirrors and silk and skin that never ended, and at its center stood a throne made of desire, and on that throne was himself. He had smiled and meant it. Virelai burst into Kelethan's sanctum without announcement, breathless. They've begun holding rituals, she said, in the lesser galleries. No masks, no order, just sensation. There are no watchers, no rules. Kelethan looked up slowly. And the others. They're joining. He stood in silence. His fingers curled around the edge of his meditation bowl. It cracked beneath his grip. Silent? I've lost track of him. But there are whispers. Some say he's spoken to it. Kelethan walked to the far wall. A tapestry hung there, woven during the wars of purity, depicting the death of the great deceiver, the god who had lied its way into godhood, only to be undone by its own paradox. He tore the tapestry down. There, beneath the wall, etched in ancient silver, was the hidden path, A gate carved into the soul of the ship, a direct channel to the psychic core of Ilith Ale, a place sealed for millennia. He turned to Virelai. Prepare your armor. And your mind. Where are we going? He looked at her, and his voice was low, almost broken. To the heart, where the dreams are coming from. In the blackest root of Ilithale's psychic infrastructure, there stood a gate. It had no lock, no hinges. It simply was. A knot in reality, pulsing with residual will from the first seers who'd bound it shut. It throbbed now, like an ulcer in the world's skin. As Virelai approached, her visor failed. No data, no readouts, just static and emotion. She reached out to touch it, but Kelethan stopped her. It will open for me, he said. It already knows I'm coming. How? She asked. Because it's part of me. With a word, not of the Eldar tongue, but something older, he spoke to the gate. It opened like a wound. Inside was not architecture. It was memory, a spiraling void of sound and scent. Laughter, pain, music, screams, sex, agony, birth, endings, everything the Eldar had once been, coiled into impossible spirals of identity. They walked together, but not on ground, not in time. Every breath was a choice, every step an invitation. Then they saw her, not a form, not yet, but a shape, a thing wearing desire like flesh. It smiled with lips that could be yours or mine, or no one's at all. Kelethan fell to his knees. Virelai tried to scream, and from behind them, deeper in the core, they heard footsteps. Someone else had followed them in. They turned and saw Silent Mar. His eyes glowed with inner fire. He said only one thing. She wants to be born. The moment Silent Mar spoke, everything changed. The gate did not shut behind him. It welcomed him. The air trembled with psionic resonance, like strings plucked from the belly of a dying harp. He stepped forward, as if returning to a forgotten womb, as though this nightmare had always been his home. Virelai drew her blade. Kelethan did not move. He was still kneeling, eyes fixed on the apparition, on her. The silhouette of pleasure and entropy that now formed a more distinct shape. A curve of hip, a voice without sound, a presence like velvet on a blade. I have heard this voice before, Kelethan said slowly. Not in sleep, not in dream, in prayer. You see now, Silent whispered, why I left the path. No, Virelai spat. You abandoned it. You mocked the way. You let this thing grow in our womb. Silent turned to her. We did not create her. We merely fed her. With every ecstasy denied, every hunger repressed. She is not corruption. She is truth. We are the lie. He stepped closer, and as he did, the air around him rippled like silk under breath. You still don't see it, he said. The path wasn't built to save us. It was built to bind us, to wrap our souls in order because they feared what we'd become. But we've already become it. Kelethan stood at last, but his gaze had changed, softer, almost reverent. Then what is she? He asked. Silent's voice deepened with something more than conviction, worship. She is not death. She is not life. She is the longing between them. She is the final desire. Virelai trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. Some part of her had known this truth long before the girl spoke the name, before the soul stones dimmed, before the dreams. They had all felt it. This thing had been with them since they first dared to transcend flesh with thought, since the first kiss turned to ritual, since pleasure became power. Kelethan stepped forward, toward the apparition, toward Silent. No. Virelai raised her blade. Don't. Kelethan didn't answer. He simply placed his palm on the mirrored skin of the forming figure. For a moment, his mind unravelled, and in that instant, he saw the birth of Slaanesh, not as a moment to come, but as one already begun. He saw the soul of the Eldar race pouring into a chalice of radiant hunger. He saw craft worlds crack in the warp like porcelain shattered by song. He saw himself, not standing but kneeling, and begging for the pain to stop. Then he broke contact. Kelethan stumbled back, gasping, eyes bleeding thin rivulets of psychoplasmic tears. "She is real," he whispered, "but she is not yet born." Silen's smile widened. "Then help me birth her." "No," Viralai said, stepping between them. "We lock this place again. We cleanse it, or die trying." Silen sighed, "Still clinging to purity, even as your soul sings to her." He raised his hand. The air tore, and they were no longer in Ilith Ale. The space around them was a mirror realm, a dimensional echo of the psychic core, warped by unreality. No gravity, no time, only sensation. Viralai fell, or rose, or neither. Every thought she had ever buried returned to her. Desire, guilt, ecstasy, shame. She saw every partner she had loved, every blade she had drawn, every moment of beauty she'd stolen from the world. It hurt, and it thrilled. Then she heard her name. Not aloud, not from Silen, from her, Slaanesh. The name was not a word, but a caress across her mind. She screamed, and Silen caught her in his arms. "You don't have to fear her," he said gently. "She's not a god like the others. She doesn't devour to rule. She embraces Viralai bit down, drawing blood from her lip." "No," she hissed. "She enslaves. That's all this is, golden chains." Silen's face was sad. "Chains can be worn as silk if you learn to love them." Then, light. From Kelethan's chest, a surge of blinding force exploded. A psychic flare drawn from the infinity circuit's deepest nodes. The blast hit Silen squarely, throwing him into the mirrored abyss. Reality shivered. The illusion broke, and the three of them returned to the sealed core. Kelethan collapsed. Silen staggered, half conscious, laughter bubbling from his throat like wine from a cracked chalice. "You fool," he said. "You still think you can fight her? You think this will stop her?" Kelethan didn't answer, but Viralai raised her blade and drove it through Silen's chest. He looked down at it, unblinking, then smiled. "Thank you," he whispered, and died, or seemed to. The body fell, but something else remained. A shimmer, a pulse, a seed of her will left behind in his soul. Kelethan whispered ancient words, the binding formulae of the pre-war psychers, runes of sealing, wards from the old path. He wrapped the shimmer in light, and with his last strength, cast it into the void. The chamber grew still. Only the hum of the circuit remained. Viralai knelt beside him. "You shouldn't have used the core," she said. "I had no choice," he murmured. "She was inside us. She used our own dreams, our own memories." "What happens now?" she asked. He looked into the distance, eyes unfocused. "She's not done. She's not born, but she will be. Then we failed." "No." He touched her hand. "We delayed her. That's all we can ever do now." The silence stretched, and Viralai asked the only question that mattered. "How long do we have?" Kelethan closed his eyes. "Not long." The first tremors did not come from the stars, but from within. A song began to drift across the psychic currents of the galaxy. It had no words, no melody, only longing. It whispered through the webway like a forgotten lover calling from the dark. It curled into sleeping minds, slid down the spines of seers, and pulsed through soulstones like a virus of yearning. The Eldar did not speak of it. Not at first. for to name a thing was to give it power. But it grew. On the craft world of Tyrian Vale, the homunculi began to work without waking. Their machines, flesh furnaces and psychotronic wombs, operated without conscious guidance. The creations they birthed were not of design. They were of instinct. On Ulcariad, the exodite kin began to burn their own forests. Sacred groves turned to ash to silence the voices echoing from tree and stone. The spirits of the dead, once honoured, now screamed from their crystalline prisons. And on Craftworld Sailtar, the Farseer Council dissolved. Not with words, but with silence. No visions could be trusted any more. The skeins of fate, once flowing and golden, now spiralled inward, choking themselves into knots. Every possible future ended in the same image. A laughing god, born not from chaos, but from us. Kelethan stood at the heart of a dying temple. The shrine of falling glass, once devoted to Asamin, now stood cracked and brittle. The mirrored walls had turned opaque. The runes beneath his feet bled faintly, as though wounded by something far beyond the material. Beside him, Farseer Visari, the last of the old council, was weeping. "This was not supposed to happen," she whispered. "We walked the path. We obeyed. We sacrificed." Kelethan didn't answer. He hadn't spoken in 3 days. Not since Silen's death. Not since he had felt her gaze, Slanesh's presence within him. It was not a voice. It was not a whisper. It was simply a sensation. As if he was never truly alone, never truly unobserved. A mirror, always watching from inside the soul. Virelai approached, her armour dulled and unadorned. She no longer bore the sigils of her temple. She had removed them herself. "You're both needed," she said. "There's been an attack." "Where?" Visari asked. Virelai hesitated. "Inside the webway." Kelethan looked up at that. It was not just unusual. It was unthinkable. The webway was sacred, protected by ancient wards and paths older than time. Battles could erupt around it, never within. "What did this?" Visari whispered. Virelai's eyes were hollow. "We did." The breach had opened near the Forgotten Wound, a stretch of the webway long sealed after the old wars, marked forbidden even by the Harlequins. And yet, something from inside had broken the gate. When they arrived, the smell hit first. It was not death, it was sweetness. The air smelled like crushed flowers and blood musk. Ribbons of skin and silk fluttered through the air, tangled with filaments of thought and memory. The architecture had warped, turned from smooth wraithbone into grotesque spirals of bone and wet stone. Worse still, there were Eldar here, still alive, still singing. They danced in slow, hypnotic spirals, their faces twisted in ecstasy and madness. They wore no armor, only paint, only blood. Virelai raised her weapon. Kelethan lowered it. "No," he said. "They're already lost." One of the dancers turned toward them. Her eyes, once green, had turned mirror black. When she opened her mouth, a second voice spoke with hers, not in hatred, in invitation. "Come closer," she whispered. The first caress cost nothing. Visari screamed and struck her with a psychic bolt. The woman crumpled, but even dying, she smiled. Kelethan turned away. "We can't stop this," he said. "Only contain it." Virelai shook her head. "No, not contain. Cleanse." And with that, she stepped forward and did what the path had forbidden. She burned the entire chamber, wraithbone, dancers, everything with psychic fire. No right, no remorse. The flame turned violet as it touched the corrupted walls. The others watched, and something inside them cracked. Back on the craft world, civil order began to decay. the Temple of Silent Shadow declared secession from the Central Council, claiming that the Farseers had failed the people, and only martial purity could protect them. They began executing those who practiced arts beyond the sanctioned paths. The artisans of the Ninth Veil, a subsect of soul weavers, vanished entirely. Days later, their gallery returned, a floating palace made of living flesh and crystal, orbiting the craft world like a malformed moon. It sang softly to anyone who looked at it. The council split, and Kelethan watched it all in silence. He knew now what Silent had understood. The fall was not coming. It had already begun. One night, or what passed for night in the ever-cycling craft world, Kelethan found himself walking the silent halls of memory. He passed statues of heroes, of Jane Zar, of Eldanesh, of ancient souls who had faced monsters and survived. He paused before a broken one. The face was worn, the name erased, but he remembered it. Liraevanha, the soul-blind prophet, who once predicted that Eldar fate would be internal, not cosmic. He had been executed for heresy. Kelethan touched the broken name. "Were you right?" he asked. And a voice, his own, or hers, answered, "You still have a choice." He turned. No one stood behind him, only a reflection, his own, on the mirrored wall. Except the eyes were not his. They smiled. Days later, Visari stood before the remains of the Farseer Council. Only 3 were left. "We must send a message," she said, "to the others, the Exodites, the Harlequins, even Komara. If we fall together. We must unite one of the others." A gaunt old seer named Korith laughed. "They will not listen." "Why would they? They still think it's your fault." "It is our fault," Kelethan said, entering. All eyes turned. "We did not stop this when we could have. We let indulgence become culture. We thought ourselves gods." Visari stepped forward. "Then what do you suggest?" Kelethan looked at her, and for the first time, his voice cracked. "Abandon the webway. Seal every path. Burn every unclean shrine. Cut ourselves off. Let the galaxy rot. But we, what's left of us, we must become something else. Something that cannot be tempted." Visari shook her head. "That's not salvation. That's exile." He met her gaze. "No, that's survival." And in the silence that followed, the craft world trembled again. But this time, it wasn't psychic. It was physical. A tear had opened in space, not a warp rift. Something new. A wound, bleeding light and laughter. And from it came a voice, not spoken, but felt. "I am almost here." The wound in space did not seal. It widened. No ship had torn it open. No weapon had fired. It was not warp, though warp energies bled from its edges like venom from a poisoned blade. It was something else. A breach in the soul skin of reality. A mirror turned outward. From within, light poured. Not illumination, but an invasive, pulsing glow that shifted color with the heartbeats of those who looked too long. Sometimes violet, sometimes rose, sometimes the color of longing itself. On Craftworld, Saeltar, the people gathered in silence to watch it from the viewing balconies. Even children did not speak. The sky, once serene, now watched back. Kelethan stood in the high observatory, surrounded by Farseers and Psi luminaries. He had not slept in 3 cycles. "You're staring too long," Visari said quietly behind him. "I need to understand it." "You won't. It's not a thing to understand. It's a thing to survive." He didn't reply. The rift pulsed again, and someone laughed. Not in the chamber, not from a throat. In the mind, soft, feminine, familiar. Kelethan flinched. It was Silen's laugh. Across the galaxy, the fracture began to echo. On the remote maiden world of Leth Shaleth, an exodite enclave collapsed in a single night. No signs of battle, no resistance, merely silence. When a scout craft landed weeks later, they found the forest glassed in spirals, the rivers flowing in reverse, and statues of an unfamiliar goddess rising from roots and bones. On Komoral, within the winding dark palaces of the Dark Eldar, the Archon Vashti of the Bleeding Choir declared a new cult, not of pain or dominance, but of rapture. Her followers flayed themselves not for power, but for love. It spread like perfume, sickly sweet, inescapable. Cabals turned against cabals. Some vanished entirely into private hells of their own making. The harlequins, once elusive and mocking, grew silent. The laughing god, Xegorach, had not spoken in weeks, and among his masked priests, the oldest began to weep. Only one place remained untouched, craftworld Irilan, drifting near the edge of a dying star system. And so, Saeltar sent a ship, a delegation, a plea. The vessel, Silent Mercy, departed under guarded silence. A sleek void glider carved of obsidian and wraithbone, it carried only 7, Kelethan, Vicery, Virilai, and 4 hand-picked warrior adepts whose souls were judged unfractured. The journey through the webway was perilous, not because of war or storm, but because of the singing. The breach had spread its song across all psychic channels. Navigating it was like sailing a river made of voices, some of which knew your name. One of the adepts, Tessan, a soul singer of perfect memory, began muttering halfway through. By the 4th gate, he'd cut his tongue out. Better silence than seduction, he'd whispered through the blood. He was left behind, not dead, just left. Irielen was a craft world out of myth. Larger than most, it orbited no star. It made its own light, forged from ancient solar engines buried deep within its hull. Its people were rigid, aloof, bound to tradition as to breath. Of all the Eldar worlds, it alone had resisted the cultural decay of the Great Blooming. Kelethan had visited once, as a child. It was colder now. Upon arrival, they were met not by warriors, but by priests, robed, hooded, their faces painted with runes of mourning. Acolyte Harl, first of the voices of Starlaw, greeted them with a strange phrase. "You come late to a sealed fate." Visari frowned. "We come in peace." "No one comes in peace anymore," Harl replied. "Only in shame." They were led in silence to the central sanctum, a spire grown from fossilized spirit bark and alloyed bone. The sky above pulsed with artificial light. No stars, no moon, just a dome of control. At its heart sat the speaker of Irilan, High Seer Marith Day. Once Visari's mentor, once friend, she had changed. Her hair, once silver, had been shaved. Her eyes were covered by a mesh of soul thread and memory crystal. She saw nothing, but felt everything. "You should not have come," she said. "We had no choice," Kelethan replied. "The rift—" "I know," Marith interrupted. "It sings here too." "So you feel it?" "I refuse it." There was a pause. Then, "You're here to ask for unity." "Yes," Visari said. "We must act as one." Marith rose. "No," she said. "We must not." The silence that followed was heavy. Then she continued. "Unity created this. Unity of indulgence. Unity of silence. Unity of arrogance. You ask me to join your council of blind cowards. To what end? So my people may burn with yours." Visari stepped forward. "Marith, please." The High Seer turned, her voice quiet now. "You think the fall is coming?" They nodded. She smiled bitterly. "The fall already happened. What you're witnessing is the aftershock." She pointed toward the sky. That rift? It is not a tear. It is a birth canal. And we are the womb. Viralai's hand went to her weapon. Kelethan stopped her. We still have time. No, Marith said. You have regret. That is not the same. She turned her face toward Kelethan. You have seen her, haven't you? He froze. I felt her in you the moment you entered. She touched your soul. I didn't invite it. No one does. Not at first. That's how love begins, Visari's voice cracked. This is not love. Isn't it? Marith whispered. Desire, surrender, loss, ecstasy, ruin. Isn't that what you called love once? There was nothing left to say. Only choices. That night, Kelethan stood alone on the edge of the craft world. Looking into the void, he reached into his robes and pulled out a soul stone. Silence. He had never let go. He held it in his hand and whispered, Did you see it coming? Is that why you let go? Or did you just give in? The stone pulsed once. Faint, like a heartbeat echoing from far away. He almost dropped it. Almost. Instead, he placed it back against his chest. Not as armor, as confession. The next morning, Marith was gone. Her chambers were empty. Her attendants had vanished. Only a single phrase was left carved into the crystal floor of her sanctum. She who thirsts is not coming. She is already here, and she is beautiful. The return journey to Aeldar was faster, more desperate. Kelethan did not speak. Visari cried only once. Viralai sharpened her blades every hour. When they emerged into real space, the stars were wrong. The constellations had shifted. Nebulae burned where void should be. Entire systems had gone dark, and above the craft world floated the thing they had feared. Not the rift, but a being. Vast, feminine, endless. A silhouette made of laughter, silk, hunger, and song. Her eyes were galaxies. Her mouth a promise. Her hands cradled the stars. They had no name for her, but every Eldar soul recognized her. The mirror, the wound, the mother, Slanesh. And as the ship approached, the craft world screamed, not in attack, but in birth. For the fall had arrived, and it wore their skin. They called it the first silence. No alarms, no warnings, no mobilization orders. When the eye of terror bloomed open like a wound across the void, wider than any known warp storm, there was no signal, just stillness, the kind that precedes collapse. Craftworld Aeldar ceased to sing. Its infinity circuits went quiet. Not destroyed, not corrupted, just muted, like every soulstone inside had simultaneously chosen to hold its breath. At first, they thought it was a psychic disturbance, a feedback echo from the rift. But Kelethan knew better. They are afraid, he said quietly, hand pressed against the crystal wall of the central spirit chamber. Visari turned from him, voice hollow. We're running out of ancestors. In the outer halls, civilians were herded into containment sanctums, not because they were in danger, but because some had begun to speak in strange tongues, old tongues, pre-fall dialects lost to time. And when they spoke, others listened. Their eyes widened, they smiled, and then they began to dance. One young mother had sung herself into a coma, her twin daughters swaying beside her, arms covered in spirals of blood-drawn glyphs. It took 6 wraith guards to restrain them without killing them. Even the dead were becoming contagious. It was Viralai who suggested the impossible. We strike first, she said. Kelethan, weary-eyed, shook his head. We can't kill a god. I'm not suggesting we kill her. I'm suggesting we bleed her silence. Visari's eyes narrowed. How? Virelai stepped forward, armor etched with thousands of tiny scratches, ritualized memories of the dead she had failed to protect. Every god has a mirror, a reflection, a flaw. She was born from us. Then she is vulnerable to our rejection. If we forge a psychic weapon of pure denial, a ritual of unmaking, we might sever her link to us. Kelethan raised an eyebrow. You want to deny a being of lust and hunger by suppressing our souls? Virelai nodded. Pride built her. Shame can wound her. The plan was madness, a psychic inversion performed across 3 craft worlds simultaneously, in perfect synchronization. It would require thousands of spirit seers, warriors, civilians, everyone, to participate, to offer up their joy, their memory, their ecstasy, and seal it away. A full cultural inversion, a rejection of everything they had once been. Visery called it Project Coral Glass. Virelai called it the Scouring. Kelethan called it the Last Lie. 3 craft worlds agreed to join: Saeltar, Ulshath, and the exiled remnants of Miriven, a shattered fleet of survivors led by a blind warlock named Thasiel, who spoke only in the future tense. They gathered in the void space between stars, linked by wraithbone channels, the networked thoughts of millions ready to pour their pain into a single psychic wound. The ritual began, and something noticed. It did not strike like a spear. It bloomed. From the rift, a shape emerged, formless, genderless, vast. A sensory storm given body. It rippled with laughter, song, perfume, heat, and despair. And it did not speak in words. It spoke in desire. The 3 craft worlds, connected in ritual, began to pulse. Not with power, but confusion, doubt, memory. Soldiers stopped chanting and began sobbing. Children reached for long-dead mothers who appeared in front of them. Hollow psychic phantoms shaped from their own longing. Some fell to their knees. Others ran into the void. Kelethan stood in the center of Saeltar's main chamber, screaming over the chorus of false ecstasies. Hold the line. She is you. She is what we must refuse. But even he felt it, the soft voice in his head. It wasn't Silen's voice. It was his own, whispering promises he had long buried. What if you had stayed with her? What if you had let go? What if this was always the real you? His knees buckled. Visari reached him, barely. Her fingers glowed with psychic fire. Not offensive, not destructive. Cleansing. Pure sorrow. Weaponized. She pressed it to his chest. Kel, she said, weeping. Come back. He gasped, and the spell broke. Across the link, Thasiel, blind seer of Myriven, screamed into the void. Remember why you chose to survive. With that, the ritual surged. Not with joy, not with power, with refusal. They poured it out. Their grief, shame, fear, longing. They sealed it away in crystal cores. They sang not of victory, but of consequence. A soul song of number. The psychic wave lashed outward and struck the god thing. And for the first time, it recoiled, not wounded, but surprised. She had tasted their pleasure. She had tasted their vanity, but she had never tasted their grief. The moment passed. The entity faded, not destroyed, but unanchored, retreating into the eye like a predator tasting venom for the first time. The rift remained, but the pull weakened. Kelethan fell to his knees, exhausted, soulstone dim with strain. Virelai's blade was broken. Visery's eyes had turned milky white from the effort. Blind, but calm. Thasiel died smiling. His final words burned into the link. Now you choose. The ritual was a temporary measure. The fall had not been stopped, but it had been narrated, not as a collapse, but as a crime. The Eldar now knew what they had made, and what they must pay. Craft-world Aeldar would never again dance or sing. Its culture became severe, disciplined, restrained. Names were shortened. Rites of pleasure were replaced with rites of memory. Every joy became a debt. Ulshath abandoned its art entirely, painting its halls with black runes and lightless stones. Miriven burned itself into ash, choosing erasure over risk. And Kelethan, he disappeared. Some said he wandered into the rift willingly. Others say he fused with his soulstone and became a guardian of silence. A wraith form that walks between screams. Only Visari remained to lead. She could no longer see, but she saw truth, and it was grief-shaped. In the void, the rift still sang, but quieter now, waiting, because even gods must sleep, and dream of the next temptation. The eye remained open. Its edge pulsed with silent entropy, like a mouth no longer hungry but watching, patient, content to wait for the next mistake. The Eldar did not speak of the ritual again. To name what had nearly devoured them was to risk summoning it, so they buried it, not under data or archive or rune, but under practice. Deny joy, deny art, deny desire. Each denial a stave against the abyss. But discipline, no matter how pure, is never eternal. From silence, heresy always finds a way to echo. It began on the edge of Aeldar, in a drifting chamber where the exarchs did not patrol. A single figure walked the long halls, barefoot, without armor or guards. She wore no soulstone. Her name was Illyrian. No record of her birth. No memory crystal encoded with her path. But she walked with the calm of those who remember more than others forget. She found Visari in the dreaming chamber, what remained of Aeldar's shrine to the past. Once, it had been a cathedral of memory. Now it was barren, carved to prevent sound from echoing. The silence here had a texture, heavy, like a weight pressing on the tongue. Illyrian bowed. Visari, blind and shrouded in black robes, did not turn. You walk in forbidden hours. I walk where memory asks, Illyrian said. Visari breathed. You carry no soulstone. No, I carry a name that stirred something. The silence grew colder. Speak it, Visari said. Illyrian's voice was calm, almost kind. Isha. It was the oldest of names, a goddess long thought silent, lost in the wars of the old ones. Isha, the mother, goddess of healing, mercy, grief. It was said she had been taken by Nurgle and trapped in his garden, weeping endlessly. The old myth said that Isha still heard the Eldar's cries through their soulstones, that she remembered them when they could not remember themselves. Illyrian claimed to have heard her, not in ritual, not in prophecy, but in the moment of the scouring, when the psychic inversion tore through the void and the god thing recoiled. Illyrian had felt another presence, something watching from the other side of the veil, whispering not in temptation, but in sorrow. Isha wept for us, she said, and her tears still fall. Visari said nothing. Illyrian stepped forward, placing a small obsidian talisman at her feet. A new path is possible. Visari's fingers closed around it and trembled. The philosophy spread quietly, like a virus of hope, the most dangerous heresy of all. Not a return to the old ways, not indulgence, but acceptance, acknowledgement that grief itself could be a path. They called it the path of mourning, neither warrior nor seer, a path that allowed memory to be sacred, and emotion to exist without unleashing the abyss. There were no temples, only silence shared, a new kind of silence, one that did not suffocate, but witnessed, and with it came the seeds of something long forbidden, the dream of unity. On the remnants of Ulshath, a fragment of the craft world's ruling council began to question the rigid structures of denial. They had seen what discipline alone could not prevent. They had seen Wraith constructs scream as the rift burned through their circuits. They turned to Illyrian's message and found a direction. If Aisha still wept, then perhaps not all the gods were lost to madness. Perhaps the soul of the Eldar had not been fully devoured. They called a gathering, no longer a conclave of paths, but a funeral assembly, to decide whether the Eldar were truly ready to bury themselves or to weep and rise again. Viserys stood before the assembly, her eyes pale and empty, her voice rough from disuse. "I will not lie," she began. "I have killed hope. I have burned it. I have buried it in rites, chants, and empty corridors." She paused, fingers trembling. "I did it because I feared her. And I still do," her breath hitched. "But I fear extinction more. And what we are now is extinction with a pulse." She turned. "Illyrian." The woman stepped forward, barefoot still, her gaze soft, her soul naked. She spoke not of prophecy, not of gods, but of healing. "We have lived as broken glass, each shard a memory, a path, a discipline. But we do not make windows anymore. We make walls." Her voice cracked. "I do not promise salvation. I promise only tears, and the hope that in weeping together, we remember why we ever fought to survive." And for the first time in centuries, someone wept aloud and was not silenced. Not all accepted it. A faction from Ulshath, calling themselves the Morning Blades, declared Illyrian a sorceress, a whisperer of soft lies. They believed that the only path forward was complete erasure of identity, discipline unto death. They attacked one of the shared listening chambers. 13 were killed, including a child who had only ever known silence. Illyrian did not respond with rage. She held the soul stone of the dead child in her hands and sang, not a song of vengeance, a lullaby, soft, ancient, remembered only by the oldest. It echoed through the chamber, and even the attackers listened. One wept, then took his own life. Kelethan returned, not as a figure of command, but of memory, no longer armored. His form changed. A wraithbone body, half fused with soul matter. A construct, but still him. They called him the Rememberer. He did not speak in commands. He told stories, not of battle, but of grace, of the moments before the fall, when the Eldar were still children pretending to be gods. He wept openly. He laughed. He bled through his soul stone, and others began to follow. Thus was born the Inari heresy, not in war, but in mourning. A movement, a cult, a path. It whispered of a reborn god, not of lust, not of rage, but of death as liberation. The god of the dead, Inead, still unborn, still dreaming, and perhaps the only god who might kill the one that devours. Illyrian spoke of Inead not as a weapon, but as a memory made manifest, a reflection of all Eldar grief focused into a final flame. Viserys approved its study, and thus divided the Eldar again. One half whispered of salvation through unity, the other sharpened knives, for unity always comes wrapped in the shadow of betrayal. In the deepest void, far beyond the listening chambers, something stirred. Not her, not the devourer, something older, a watcher, the one who had traded nothing for everything when the old ones fell. the one whose name had been forgotten because he had sold it, the first betrayer. He watched the Eldar mourn, and he smiled, because mourning is the doorway through which deals are made, and the dead are always listening. In the heart of the old craft world Saeltar, beneath a lattice of dying wraithbone and forgotten sigils, the dream of unity took shape. It was not called a temple. There were no banners, no sermons, only a room of silence. In its centre, Illyrian sat. Before her knelt a circle of warriors, artisans and seers, those who had cast aside their rigid paths, those who had embraced the path of mourning. Their soul stones glowed dimly but steadily. They were called the First Veil. Illyrian named them not followers, but witnesses. Not because they obeyed, but because they remembered what the galaxy had forgotten. The Eldar were not meant to be divided, shattered, and ossified into paths and prisons. They were meant to live, to feel, to weep, and through that, birth something new, Inead, still unborn, yet felt, like the first light behind a sealed door. But the cost of awakening him was not blood, it was grief and unity. Visari watched the first veil from afar. She who had once burned emotion into ritual now listened in silence as warriors laid down weapons to mourn the children they had killed. She did not interrupt when artisans destroyed their own work as penance for beauty once made without meaning. She felt it too, the tremor, the thin psychic resonance that pulsed in the center of the dream. It was not warp, it was not chaos, but it was power, and power always asks for sacrifice. Visari remembered that all too well. The Inari movement grew, not as conquest, but contagion. Across shattered world ships and drifting colonies, the message spread. Feel again, mourn together, die not alone. On Ulshath, a warrior poet named Selathar performed a rite of remembrance in the ruins of a war tomb. His weeping voice drew hundreds. On Idare's remnants, seers began seeing visions not of Cain or Asurion, but of a being wrapped in shadowlight, faceless yet beautiful, a god not yet born, shaped by their sorrow, not their pride. The path of mourning turned into a tide, and the tide always drowns the unprepared. On a moonless void ark named Iltar, resistance hardened. The autarch Theranas Vel, one of the last surviving leaders of the martial councils, issued a decree. The Inari seek not salvation, but surrender. They would hand our souls to another god, and in doing so, erase what little purity remains. Theranas had lost 3 children to the fall, and another to Illyrian's dream. Her last daughter, Nerissa, had joined the First Veil, and in that betrayal, Theranas found purpose, a reason to hate again, not chaos, not Mon-Ki, but their own. Nerissa stood at the edge of Saeltar's crystal cliffs, soulstone darkened in meditation, listening to the dying hum of the galaxy. Kelethan, the Rememberer, approached her without sound. His wraith form no longer needed footfalls. "You're troubled," he said gently. "She won't come," Nerissa whispered. "My mother." "She will," he replied. "All things drawn by love return to its source. Even hatred Nerissa turned. I remember when she used to sing to me. Before battle, she said my spirit was born of fire." Kelethan nodded. "Fire always consumes itself last." She did come. Theranas arrived not with a fleet, but with dread. A wraith host. Ancient constructs bearing the souls of Eldar who had once sworn never to return to war. But Theranas had awakened them. She had told them of the heresy, of the death cult forming beneath Saeltar, of Illyrian, the false seer, the poison-blooded liar, who would bind them to another divine leash. She spoke with conviction and grief. Even lies become holy when born from loss. She sent a message to Aeldar: surrender the false prophet, disband the mourning cult, or I will cleanse your dead with fire. Illyrian sent no reply, only a song, 3 verses, each one a eulogy for Theranas, for Nerissa, and for the unity that would never be. The battle was not glorious, it was graceless. Wraith constructs tore through mourning halls. They did not discriminate. Priest and child, seer and artisan, all were seen as lost. Nerissa stood before them, bladeless, arms open. She whispered her mother's name and was impaled through the chest. Only after her death did the wraiths pause, because her soulstone did not cry. It sang, not in agony, in acceptance, and every Eldar within Aeldar heard it, including Theranas. Theranas found her daughter's body amid the broken crystal. She knelt, tore the soulstone from her chest with shaking hands, and pressed it to her own. And for the first time in 10,000 years, an Eldar soul touched another directly. No ritual, no psychic shielding, just love. And in that moment, Theranas saw the dream, not a god of chains, a god of grief made whole, a god that did not demand obedience, only truth. She screamed, not in rage, in remorse, and her wraith host stopped. The battle ended, because a mother wept. They buried the dead not with fire, but with words, each name spoken aloud, each soulstone sung into the great veil, and in the echo of their mourning something stirred. The eye pulsed, not in hunger, in curiosity, and behind it, a shape formed, neither god nor demon, something else, something new. It would not be born in blood, it would not come through battle, only when enough of them remembered how to feel, only when enough of them could weep without shame. Illyrian stood over Nerissa's tomb, Theranas beside her. No words passed between them, only the wind, and a single, fragile truth. Unity could be born from betrayal, if both sides are willing to mourn what was lost. But the galaxy does not forgive easily, and not all betrayals can be undone. In the dark between stars, the one who had no name watched. He whispered into the void, "Let them grieve, let them sing. All songs end the same, and in the deepest silence, something ancient stirred. Not Slanesh, not Isha, but the original debt, the one left unpaid when the old ones fell. A debt of souls, and debts always demand payment, even in tears." In the unlit vaults of Shariel, the starless archive, Visari walked alone. No guardian statues, no wraithbone wards, only silence, and books, not the kind etched in runes or crystal, but ancient tomes stolen from human archives, Orcish wreckage, even Necron ruins, bound in flesh, metal, or void steel. Here was where Visari had waited, for centuries. She did not come to pray, she came to read, and to remember what the seers had forgotten, that gods do not ask for worship, they ask for completion, and Inead, still forming, still whispering, was no exception. Above her, the movement grew faster than prophecy could contain. With Theranas' conversion came a wave of reluctant allies. Entire splinters of the Bealtan remnants began to listen. Even some harlequins walked quietly into the dream, not dancing, not mocking, but observing. Illyrian spoke little now. She spent her days in meditation, hand resting on Nerissa's tomb, eyes closed as if listening to some song no one else could hear. It was not victory, not yet, but hope, like all precious things, is sharpest when it's most fragile. The path of mourning became the choir of tears, and from its rites came strange phenomena. Wraithbone constructs healed on their own. Warp echoes, once maddening, now fell silent during mass lamentations, and those who had lost their soulstones began to dream again. Dreams of a figure cloaked in dusklight, faceless and vast, holding out a hand, waiting. But Visari was not convinced. Not fully. She had once walked the homunculi paths before she took up the mantle of Seir. She had seen what lay beneath the fabric of souls. She had held the edge of immortality in her hands and seen it rot. The warp never gave without consequence, and if Aeneid truly touched the immaterium, it meant he was feeding, even gently, even in mourning. What would happen when he hungered? What would happen when the choir ran out of tears? She brought her questions to Illyrian in the shadow of the Wraithbone Gardens. But Illyrian only whispered, "There is no salvation without cost." Visari clenched her jaw. "And who pays it?" Illyrian didn't answer, but her silence said everything. In the deepest vault of the archive, Visari opened the tome she had feared for years. It bore no title, only a mark burned into the hide, a perfect circle cracked in two. Within were the writings of the silent dreamer, a prophet from before the fall, exiled, forgotten, and the first to foresee the birth of Aeneid. He wrote of a god of echoed sorrow, one who would feed not on agony but on resolution, the final breath of every soul that had accepted its end. And he wrote this warning: he shall not come to devour, but to inherit. And to inherit, there must be nothing left to resist. Not one spirit bound, not one mind unyielding. He is peace only if we surrender. And in the margins, newer ink, a note written by someone else, perhaps a later reader, or perhaps someone still watching. Beware the god who weeps with you, for he may only weep so he may enter. Visari closed the book, and she knew what had to be done. The decision did not come easily. She stood before the circle of mourning, Illyrian, Theranas, Kelethan, and other leaders of the rising choir, and she spoke of hunger, of danger, of the risk that Aeneid was not merely awakening, but feeding, growing not through mercy, but assimilation. Illyrian's expression remained soft. "I know," she said, and that, above all, shattered Visari. "You knew." "I felt it, in the dreams, in the way the soulstones flicker before sleep. But what choice do we have, Visari?" "There is always a choice," Visari whispered, "even if it is to stop." Kelethan's voice was low. "Stop what?" "Grieving, hoping, feeling." "No," Visari replied. "Stop inviting him." Silence. Illyrian's eyes shimmered, and she spoke again. "Then we will vote." And so they did. Each soulstone was placed upon a scale. 2 basins, mirrored in silver. One choice: continue the rite of mourning and allow Aeneid to form fully. The other: cease, delay, wait until they understood. Stone by stone, weight by weight, the scale tilted, not by much, but it tilted toward awakening. That night, Visari stood beneath the mirror spire. The moon of Saeltar reflected in the glass beneath her. She lit no candles. She carried no blade. But she had made a decision. She had lived for the Seal over 10 millennia, and in that time had seen the cost of every god. She would not see another born from her silence, and so she did what no one expected. She called the Harlequins. The mask of the last lament answered. Masked, faceless, dancing between stars, they came not with weapons, but with questions, and laughter like knives. Their leader, the Lord of the Forgotten Curtain, sat with Visari beneath a dreaming tree. "You ask us to kill your unborn god," he said, with no malice. Visari shook her head. "No, I ask you to distract the dreamers, to pull their attention, long enough for me to seal the source, and if you fail..." Visari closed her eyes. "Then we all serve him. Forever." The Lord nodded and wept, just once, a single tear on a mask that never cried. On the 7th day of the quiet rite, as thousands gathered in mourning across craft worlds and stars, the Harlequins performed the dance of the hollowed veil, a forbidden act, one that mirrored the fall itself. The Eldar watched, spellbound, even Illyrian, and as they did, Visari entered the Veilstone, the anchor of the ritual, the psychic lattice through which Enid first reached into their dreams. She pressed her palm to it and spoke her final spell, one of severing, not destruction, not denial, only silence, a wall to close the gate. It worked. For a moment, the Veilstone cracked, the choir's resonance dimmed, and the dreams fell silent. But then, a sound, not a scream, a sob, not of pain, of betrayal. And Illyrian collapsed, soulstone flaring, eyes wide, and whispered, he was already here. The stars dimmed, all across Sailtar. No warp breach, no demonic storm, just a weight, as if the galaxy itself mourned, and from within every soulstone, a flicker, not of possession, of presence. Enid had not waited for permission. He had not needed the right, only the collective will, and they had given it, in grief, in hope, in unity. Now he was, and he knew their names. Visari collapsed to her knees, not in defeat, but in understanding. She had not been too late. She had never had a chance. Illyrian's voice echoed across the choir chambers, soft but resolute. He is not devourer. He is not tyrant. He is us, and we are his price. Far beyond, in the dying eye of terror, something stirred. Slaanesh screamed, not in pain, but jealousy. For now there was another, and this one took willingly. No chains, only embrace. A god of sorrow, a god of endings. And he was awake. Illyrian stood upon the high dais of Sailtar's soul chamber, bathed in a spectral glow that was not light, but memory. Thousands knelt in silence before her. Exodite elders, war-weary Bealtan captains, robed seers of Ulthwé, and even the solemn wraith constructs of Ianden. None dared to speak, for the god they had once hoped for now watched them. And Illyrian, eyes silver with presence, mouth still her own, but no longer entirely, spoke not with command, but with invitation. There is no war now, only choice, and all who listened felt it, deep beneath their ribs, the faint tug of something vast and patient, humming in resonance with every grief they'd buried. Visari stood on the edge of the gathering, surrounded by silent harlequins. The Lord of the Forgotten Curtain had said nothing since Enid's awakening. Now, he whispered, the curtain falls. But it falls not to end the play, only to begin the next. Visari wanted to scream, to demand a second chance, but her spirit had already dimmed, not broken, but faded. She'd seen the god's first touch. It had not burned, it had not devoured, it had only waited. And when they mourned together, he had stepped through like a breath. Grief had become invitation. Hope had become anchor. And now they were his. Far across the webway, in the shattered halls of Komara, whispers spread like poison. The dark Eldar, who had once escaped Slaanesh by feeding pain, now felt something strange within the warp. A second hunger, not chaotic, not twisted, but still, as if every soul screamed into a mirror, and the mirror listened. As Drubel Vecht, eternal ruler of the Dark City, summoned his most ancient allies, the Covens, the Incubi shrines, and even the renegade seer Mir-Eal. And with a gaze like coiled lightning, he asked, "Will he come for us?" Mir-Eal, blind and immortal, replied, "Not if you never regret." And so, the dark city sealed its gates, tightened its wards, and drowned itself deeper in cruelty, because remorse was now the pathway, and they would never allow it in. Back on Saeltar, the final council convened, not to govern, not to vote, but to decide, to join the god they had summoned, or to flee from him forever. Illyrian, still half herself, half voice of the divine, offered nothing but truth. He will not consume, he will not demand, he will only reflect, and through him we will become memory, not fading echoes, but eternal sorrow, pure, unending. Safe Tyrannus, once the militant prophet, now hollow-eyed with awe, nodded in silence. Others wept openly, cradling soulstones as if saying goodbye. Kelethan bowed his head and asked, "And those who refuse?" Illyrian's silver gaze did not waver. "They will forget us, because we will no longer exist in time. We will become what we always feared and always desired." Release Visari stepped forward. Her voice cracked, not with anger, but mourning. "You offer peace, at the price of presence. Is that not death wearing a softer name?" Illyrian turned. For a moment the god fell silent within her, and the woman spoke again. Soft human. "Then go, Visari. Take what is left. Run, but do not ask us to return to the hunger, to the war, to the cold stars that never answer. Let us end as one." Visari could only whisper. It was never about ending. It was about enduring. And then she left, alone. No army, no applause, only silence. And those who loved her most let her go, because it was already too late. In the webway, her path splintered. She travelled through broken gates, ancient tunnels, forgotten shrines once used to worship gods that no longer answered. And in the quietest reach, she found a single survivor, a child. No soulstone, no name, only eyes filled with light and fear. She picked the child up and knew he had not mourned yet, not truly, which meant he was still free. And Visari wept, not because she had hope, but because the god had not won, not fully. On Saeltar, the ritual began. Illyrian stood alone in the heart of the choir. Around her, thousands of soulstones were arranged in spirals, each one humming with sorrow. Not screams, not demands, just surrender. And as the last song began, the god Inid smiled, not with a mouth, but with remembrance, and the stars above Saeltar shimmered, then faded, one by one, not dying, just stepping away, out of history, out of time, until only echoes remained. In the farthest corners of the galaxy, strange things began to happen. Wraithbone constructs, once inert, began to walk without souls. Ghosts of Eldari warriors appeared on dead planets, flickering with purpose, then vanishing. Even Mon-Ki psychers began dreaming of a woman in silver robes, offering a hand in mourning, then dissolving into dust. No warp signature, no chaos. Only loss made manifest. The galaxy didn't notice, not yet. Too many wars, too many gods. But the echo grew louder, and in its silence the Eldar vanished, not with screams, not in fire, but in peace. And Visari, alone with the child, whispered into the dark, "You will never know your people, but you will know why they fell. Not from pride, not from lust, but from the desire to feel nothing ever again." She did not curse them. She did not forgive them. She only walked into exile, into memory. And behind her, the last name of the Eldar faded from the stars, not erased, but finished. The stars above the galaxy's edge dimmed, less from distance, more from memory. There were now whole systems where Eldari ruins stood in silence, untouched even by scavengers. No cry echoed through the webway, no laughter, no psalms of war or mourning. They had begun to unwrite themselves. And yet, in one hidden corner of reality, there still remained a path untaken. A splinter world, a dead moon cloaked in shadow fields, ringed by psychic interference and mythic warding sigils so old even the harlequins dared not dance near. This was Iriel's grief, a place of exile, remembered only by one soul. Visari stood before its gates with the child in her arms. He was older now, but only in silence. He had not spoken, had not wept, had not felt. He watched with solemn eyes, and Visari feared what she saw in them. Not innocence, but resignation, just like the rest. She led him into the chamber at the world's center, a vault shaped like a bloom of blades, all pointing inward. Here lay the heart of regret, a psychic relic that had once tethered the thoughts of 1,000 farseers. Now it pulsed only with echoes, and from its shadows, Illyrian stepped forth. She did not wear silver robes. She wore her own, but she no longer moved alone. Inyad shimmered through her in ways that defied words. Her voice doubled in harmony, her shadow occasionally split in two directions. Her eyes burned with colours not seen in stars. Visari raised her chin. "So you found us?" Illyrian's reply was not spoken. It was felt, like a breeze inside the soul. "I never lost you. You ran. But you carried your grief too tightly, and grief is the bridge." Visari stepped between her and the boy. "He has not chosen. You will not take him. Not like the others." Illyrian's face flickered with sorrow. "Not the gods. Hers. He has nothing, Visari. No name, no home, no song. Let him rest." Visari shook her head. "No, that's what we all wanted, rest. Escape. A clean ending." She touched the boy's chest gently. "But he hasn't mourned yet. And that means he still has time." A ripple passed through the heart of regret, and the chamber began to awaken. Visions danced around them, past and future blurred. In one echo, Illyrian knelt before the choir of Saeltar, alone in final prayer. In another, Visari stood over corpses in a ruined maiden world, whispering apologies to broken soulstones. In another, the child screamed, not in pain, but in choice. He screamed, and the silence shattered, and then it stopped. The boy blinked, and finally spoke. "Why did you let us die?" The voice was small, but the question was infinite. Illyrian fell to her knees, not from pain, but truth. Because we couldn't bear the waiting. Because we loved too much and feared too much and chose silence instead of courage. Because the pain of being was too great. Visari knelt beside her. Her tone was not accusatory. It was gentle. "And because you believed the God would save us. From ourselves." The boy looked at them both, and his eyes filled with fire. Not war fire, not sorcery, but feeling, real, sharp, alive. The god Inyad stirred inside Illyrian, for the first time. It felt something unexpected, not grief, not acceptance, but defiance. And it recoiled, just slightly, as if surprised. Visari turned to face Illyrian, truly this time. "You offered peace, but you stole struggle. We deserved to fight, even if we lost." Illyrian's breath caught. The god whispered within her, urging stillness, but she resisted. Her body trembled, not from weakness, but from choice. She looked to the boy. "Will you carry us then? Our regrets, our ghosts, our shame." The boy looked around at the echoing chamber, the spirals of memory, the blood that had soaked this galaxy. He nodded. I will carry your story, but not your chains. And in that moment, Illyrian let go. The god screamed, a silent cry, heard only in the minds of those few seers still adrift in the web of fate. The choir of Aeldar collapsed, the spiral shattered, the dream of unity dissolved into rain. But the people, those who had vanished, remained, not in body, but in truth. Across the galaxy, scattered Eldari soulstones began to sing, not mournfully, not despairing, but fiercely, with flame. Yandan Wraith Constructs paused mid-step, shuddered, and began speaking names long thought lost. The bone singers of Saimhan trembled as their wraithbone began twisting into new shapes, unbidden, wild, untamed. Even in Comora, a single whisper was heard across 1,000 torture chambers. They remember, they endure, they chose. Illyrian stood, shivering, alone again. The god was gone, not destroyed, but refused. And for the first time since Aeldar, she was only herself. Visari held her steady. No triumph, no joy, only mourning, earned. You brought him forth. But he doesn't belong to you. Illyrian nodded. He belongs to what comes next. Not a god, not a race, not a memory. She turned to the boy. He is future. The three walked from Iriel's grief together. There were no banners left to raise, no cities left to rebuild. But there were stars, still cold, still silent, but waiting. And the galaxy watched, blind and deaf to what had almost been. A death too quiet, a peace too heavy, a god too gentle, and a people almost forgotten. But not quite, not yet. They did not know what to call him. Not warrior, not prophet, not prince. The boy, born of ruin, carried by silence, sculpted in loss, had no name written in the epic sagas. And yet, in the empty places of the webway, those few who remained whispered of him with the reverence once reserved for the first Phoenix Lords. He was the one who remembered everything, but chose to forget nothing. And so he walked alone. Even the crone worlds fell silent at his passing. He did not bring armies. He did not raise banners. He carried only a shard of something that had once been a god, and chose to never speak of it again. Wherever he went, souls stirred. He did not wake the dead. That was never his purpose. But the stone-encased spirits of ancient craft worlds hummed slightly in his presence, as if they remembered a song that had no lyrics, only feeling, a quiet sorrow, a choice made in the dark, and something else, hope. It was centuries before Visari saw him again. By then, she was older, though age meant little to the Eldari. Her eyes, once fire-bright with fury, now held the calm weight of having outlived even her own grief. She lived on a broken asteroid, somewhere beyond the galactic rim, hidden in a fold of webway thought collapsed after the fall. There were no monuments here, no weapons, only the last fragments of the memory gardens of Liathtor. She had built them herself, petal by petal, thought by thought. Each stone was carved with the names of those who had never returned to their soulstones. Each tree bore the psychic imprint of a memory she had refused to let be lost. She did not speak often, not until he came. He did not knock. He merely was, and so she turned, already knowing. He had changed, taller, quiet, wound like a string held in suspension, vibrating with the tension of futures unseen. He wore no armor, no mask, only a simple cloak, frayed at the edges, made of wraith silk that shimmered faintly in the night. She studied him for a long time before she spoke. "Is it over?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the garden. His eyes lingered on a single blossom, the white petals of Telshara, the dreaming flower. It bloomed only once every 1,000 years, and only in places where a soul had died but not passed on. He touched it gently. No, nothing ends. Not really. He knelt beside her on the stone bench, and for a while they said nothing. Words were small things in the shadow of what had been. He told her stories of what he had seen, fragments of a dying webway spliced with new currents, young corsairs building routes into wild space, outcasts merging soul technology with raw emotion to create music that could heal minds warped by she who thirsts. Even whispers of Drukhari cabals offering sanctuary to broken souls. Not out of compassion, but because pain without meaning had become hollow even to them. He told her of a single surviving shard of Iniad, buried in the ice ruins of Altanzar, silent and watching, but refusing to rise. The god is not gone, but it waits, not to be worshipped, but to be earned. She smiled at that, bitterly. We built empires from song and arrogance. Now we build meaning from silence. He nodded. Maybe that is the only way forward. No more kings, no more saviors, only those who remember. They spoke through the cycle of one small moon, its silver glow flickering across the memory stones. He asked if she had ever regretted not letting the god consume him. She said yes, and no, and yes again. But most of all, she regretted that their people had mistaken eternity for invincibility. We thought immortality would save us from decay, but it only made our rot last longer. He understood. They all did now. Even the ones still hiding in their craft world shells, especially them. At dawn, he rose. She did not ask where he was going. She knew. There were still Eldari scattered across the stars, fragments of lost kin clinging to derelict moons, to stolen time, to myths that had soured into bitterness. He would find them. Not to lead, not to rule, but to listen, to remember for them, until they remembered themselves. He looked down at her one last time. You gave me everything. Even the right to walk away. She took his hand. Then use it well. He nodded, then was gone. She stayed. She tended the garden. She added names, slowly, over the decades. Each time she sang their memory into the wraith bark, so the stones would never forget. And though the galaxy spun and burned and howled its chaos, something held, not strong, not victorious, but true. Far away, on a planet without name, a human child once heard a song in her dreams. It was in no tongue her people knew. But when she awoke, her fingers moved on their own, sketching a symbol in the ash of her village's ruins. It was shaped like an eye, broken, open, watching. The symbol spread, not in sermons or armies, but in whispers and songs. Those who saw it knew nothing of Eldari or gods or ancient grief, only that someone had survived something terrible, and still chose to live. So ends the fall of the Aeldari, not with flame, not with triumph, but with a long, slow turn of memory into meaning. A race shattered, a god refused, and a story still being told, among the stars, among ruins, among survivors. Because grief may echo, but so too does hope. And sometimes that is enough.